Hello and welcome to Screams from the Center. This is my broadcast where I talk about topics that I find interesting and fascinating. On today's show, we're going to have Republicans bravely poor shaming, personal responsibility, but only if you're poor, and the modern poor tax. So I guess it's a cornucopia of poverty this episode. So please stay tuned and join me and enjoy the show. Thank you. The Republican Party in Kansas has gotten into the game of poor shaming. It's sort of like slut shaming, except much worse. And the Republican-backed legislature, including Republican Sam Brownback, has supported a bill that limits things that welfare recipients can do. This is all in the name of trying to curb spending. So it bars things like going into casinos with your cards, movie theaters, get this, cruise ships, jewelry stores, because we all know how those fat, lazy, poor people are buying bling by the truckloads. So it also does a limit of being able to pull $25 a day maximum from an ATM machine. Now, let's say your rent is $250. If you're that lucky to have rent at $250, that means you have to go to an ATM machine, pay fees every day to draw out $25 for 10 days every month. You have to make the time to do this just to pay your rent. Now, they, of course, say you could just walk into a bank and withdraw the money. Well, that's true, except that banks will only allow those sorts of things if you have a bank account. And in America, 17 million people, these are adults, don't have bank accounts. And most of them are, you guessed it, poor. So, we're left with what does this all mean? Well, Sam Brownback just gave a huge tax break to the richest people in his state. Two of which are the Koch brothers. Yes, they actually are in Kansas. So, basically, we have to curb in spending because, of course, they're taking in less money. And Brownback is facing over $1 billion in deficit spending and debt just on his economic system. The Reagan economic system. That trickle-down thing. Well, so here's what we're looking at. We're looking at poor shaming because the narrative is that these people are lazy and don't want to work. And I've discussed this before. But the thing is, over 60% of food stamp or welfare recipients are working. They actually have jobs, one or more jobs. It's the barrier of pay is so low that you can actually have a job and still qualify for these benefits. So, here we're left with the governor trying to reduce spending by inconveniencing people, as much as possible. Now, the other funny thing about this $25 limit, of course, is how many bank terminals or ATM machines have you ever seen that spits out $5 bills? I rarely saw ones that do $10. But so the reality of the situation is you can only pull out $20 a day. So if your rent is $250, you have to spend 10 days to get to the $200, then 2 more days to get to $240, and then another day to get to $260 so that you'd have your $250 for rent. It's ridiculous. Yet, we have confirmed fraud in Florida. Governor Rick Scott he was head of the healthcare facility that perpetrated over $1 billion in Medicare fraud. And how was he punished? He was elected to governor twice. Also, it could be argued that when he decided to do drug testing for those evil poor people, his wife was actually in charge of the company that did the test. There's no double standard there. But we'll get back to Kansas, because Kansas also does drug testing. And the beauty of that is they spend over $40,000 on this drug screening for welfare recipients. Because if we give over our hard-earned taxpayer money, we have to make sure that these people aren't on drugs. And that has netted 2 people. Not 2%, 2 people. So, what's the deal here? Why are Republicans so bent on the idea of shaming poor? Well, of course, we know the answer to that. And it's personal responsibility. Republicans are always talking about personal responsibility. I happen to agree with the idea of personal responsibility. I don't see anything wrong with that. But the definition of personal responsibility is odd. Republicans seem to think that personal responsibility means that you have to pay for something that you are incapable of paying for. That's the best takeaway and the shortest takeaway I can get from it. And I'll go more into the personal responsibility thing in another segment, because it's an interesting and fascinating topic. Thank you. Talk about a subject that Republicans like to mention a lot, and that is personal responsibility. We hear it all the time. We can't have welfare, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and other programs because people aren't pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. They're relying on the government to provide these things for them. And on principle, when I was a libertarian, I believed this. Even though I was poor, I still believed in the idea of this type of personal responsibility, where you take responsibility for your actions and, you pull yourself up. What it really means is the Republicans want to make sure that poor people can't pay for stuff that they have to. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Let's take a look at this. So, like I said, it's all these social programs that we need personal responsibility for. It's never mentioned anything about the tax breaks and subsidies given to billionaires and corporations as being a lack of personal responsibility. Those things are needed. Because as I discussed in another episode, poor people, to incentivize them, you have to make them suffer and starve. Rich people, to incentivize them, you need to give them more money. That's the only way the system works, according to the Republicans. So, on with personal responsibility. I'd like to point out a great example of Republican personal responsibility. We had a pizza shop recently in Indiana that has said that they're going to refuse to do gay weddings. Now, I don't even know the most crazy of people to have pizza at their wedding, but we'll digress from there. So, they went out of business due to the backlash of being bigots. Well, normally, my idea of personal responsibility was they stood up for their beliefs, they want to be bigots, and the free market responded by shutting them down. But apparently Republican personal responsibility is a little different. An independent group started a GoFundMe page which raised over $900,000 for these bigots. I'm sorry, good Christian bigots. I mean, good Christians. So, we are left with the idea that if you're poor and you make a minimum wage, that you are responsible for not being able to provide health insurance or any kind of coverage or being able to pay for your food or anything like that. You're responsible for it. But if you are a conservative and vote Republican and are a bigot, we'll pay you a cash bonus. Thank you. Are speeding tickets, parking tickets, and other ticketable fines really a secret poor tax? Let's look at this. In a lot of places in the country, particularly in the South, if you get a ticket and you can't pay it, you can go to court and get set up on a payment system. Now, the thing with this is, once you go to court, you get fees, the court fees added on. And then, when you get into this payment system, these private companies who have the power to have you arrested if you fail to pay, split up your payments into what they call manageable numbers. Say, $10 a week, $25 a week, whatever the case is. Almost the entirety of that is basically finance charges by these parole companies. You never actually get to pay much on the principal. So it's reported back to the government that you are delinquent on these, and they put more fees on it, and you're still back in that system. There are people who have had fines for around $100 that have paid over $1,000 in fees and finance charges and even gone to jail. We have grandmothers. We have mothers, brothers, sons, everything. It's disparaging to the poor. The funny thing is, when you're poor and you need a bank loan or you need a credit card or you need some sort of help, you can possibly get that help. The problem is you end up being in this loop of credit. You get charged twice as much as most people who don't need the credit can afford. If you have great credit, you can get credit cards for like 11, 12% interest. If you're poor, it's almost 30%. I call these things the poor tax. This is the unwritten taxation that is that everybody who doesn't make enough money to make ends meet has to suffer. Payday loans also fall into this, as they charge rates of 18 to 30%, sometimes even 50%, depending on the state regulations. These are all taxes on the poor. They don't necessarily go to the government, but they are a tax. So, it's bad enough. Well, let's do an example. Let's say you get a speeding ticket. Now, I know in my state, pretty much the minimum speeding ticket would be $175. So, you would have to make over $20 an hour for an 8-hour day in order to reduce that ticket to the amount of work of one day's work. Over $20 an hour. The minimum wage is $7.25. Some states are a little higher. The highest, I think, is $15. So, no matter what, if you're in an hourly job, typically speaking, you are going to put in more than a 1 day's worth of work to pay the minimum speeding ticket. Now, this isn't about punishing the bad guys. A speeding ticket is a serious thing, and you should take it seriously. But is it really the kind of thing that we have to decimate someone who is poor over? Is that what we're talking about these days? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I've heard some suggestions of proportionate fining. Basically, the fine fits a certain percentage within your income. I think I could support something like that. I mean, if someone makes $21 million a year and gets pulled over for speeding, a $175 ticket is nothing. I mean, they've wasted more money just being stopped than they do with the ticket. So, what's the fine? What's the penalty? And if someone who's making that kind of money gets pulled over too much and gets their license suspended or whatever, they can hire a driver. Fines in America are consequence-free for the higher income you go than for the lower income, which makes it a regressive tax system. Several states, to overcome budgetary problems because they've lowered taxes on the rich, have resorted to raising these types of fees, raising driver's license renewal fees, raising registration renewal fees. In some cases, they've gone as high as 40%. So, if you paid $100 to register your car, you would pay $140 after this raise. And a lot of people can't afford those kinds of things. So, what's the answer? I mean, I happen to like the idea of proportionate fining. It's a way to even the playing field. It's a way to give a little relief to the poor, and it still punishes you for the infraction that you did. But it punishes you fairly. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you like, subscribe, and spread the word about my broadcast. Please leave any suggestions, comments in the section below, and you have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me for Screams from the Center.